Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. It's lovely to have so many people with us on this Tuesday morning, halfway through September. I think some people, fair play, I think said it's already October, what with the weather, etc. But I think, as the days get cooler, I'm hoping that actually we get more people attending because they want to stay inside. But we will see. We will see. Welcome, everybody, particularly if you're new or if you found out about this forum through the Housing Community Summit or anything else that's been done recently. It's great to have you with us. My name is Matt Baird. I am the founder and co-host of the Social Housing Roundtable. I've been running these for over 3 years now. And the idea is to bring the sector together to have these relatively informal chats every single Tuesday between 11 and 12. We've done over 130 episodes now, but with the focus mainly on discussion rather than on just our co-host necessarily speaking at you for an hour. So this will have a nice split between James sharing what he's come to talk to us about today, and then a more open discussion around some of the key themes that come out of it. So if you have got questions, thoughts, ideas, what James is sharing, please put them in the chat. And after that, please do share them more widely, feeling free to kind of come into the chat yourself. If you're not comfortable doing that, it's absolutely fine. Just send me an anonymous message or send me a message directly, and I'll make sure it gets asked and kept anonymous. Day to day, I'm a recruiter and I'm co-chair of the board for Spring Housing in Birmingham. So I've been recruiting in social housing for over 11 years. And this whole platform stays free and open to everybody because of that. So if you are looking for recruitment support, please do reach out. It keeps this amazing forum running. And now on to today. So I'm always an advocate for trying to get new speakers on wherever we possibly can, which you'd think after doing 130 something episodes would be a challenge. And yet actually we've already got the rest of this year booked out, and we've got about 8 sessions booked for next year already. So if you are looking for us to come and speak and share your thoughts, please do reach out. But I bumped into James. I put it on my LinkedIn post. I met James at the Manchester Housing Conference this year. And there were some sessions there that I didn't engage with too much, but Alertical were running a session and were the sponsors for the Social Housing Roundtable in 2024. So I wanted to go show my support, but I'm also a big advocate for the work they're doing and the insight they can share more widely with the sector. And then James pops up with a question really about lived experience and about the insight that can have. And I went over and said, I need your number. I need you on the round table. We'll catch up soon. And it wasn't much more than that, really. And then we bumped into each other at the House of Lords. And then we bumped into each other in Liverpool. I was like, when I get a slot, I'll let you know. And we had a speaker due this week, unfortunately couldn't make it. And I was like, James, do you fancy doing a slot? He's like, well, I'm on annual leave. So believe it or not, James is actually on holiday at the moment. But he said, actually, I'd love to comment and share my lived experience and share my insights. So I'm going to pass over to James. The one thing I will say is obviously, look, people have many different views on an awful lot of the ideas we're going to share today. Feel free to disagree with ideas. It's really, really important to do them respectfully is all I ever ask. And actually will encourage debate and encourage thought throughout. And I'd say if you have thoughts or comments what James is sharing, please put them in the chat, and then it'll be more open, welcoming you all to come in and chat as we do. So James, without further ado, I will pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Well, good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the Social Housing Roundtable and to have the chance to speak to all of you today. So if you don't know, my name is James Feetham. I am 33 years old. I've been in housing for just about 6-7 months now, and I'm the Inclusive Services Team Leader at Great Places Housing Group. So the role of me and my team is to understand basically all of the customers that live in our 24,000 homes that we've got within our stock, really understand what barriers are in place for them, whether they're to do with accessibility and communication, whether they're to do with disability and ill health, and think about how we can tailor the services that we offer as a housing association to our customers to make sure that they can still access those services with equity. I've got a lot of lived experience, having lived in social housing pretty much all of my life. Even right now, I live in a social housing property. I do have a physical disability. I am a wheelchair user. I am an ambulatory wheelchair user, so sometimes you might see me in person, not necessarily using my chair at any particular time, but I do use my wheelchair 9 times out of 10 as my main walking aid. So I do have a lot of lived experience in terms of what it's like for a disabled tenant living in social housing. And now I actually have the absolute honour of being on the inside and being able to change things within the housing sector and do things in the right way for people like me and people from other minority backgrounds as well.
Right, mine absolutely froze there, so that's absolutely great. So we're going to keep this quite almost interview based this morning, and I think it's important probably to start with how your role came about and the work you're doing with with the sector as a whole, really, never mind just your business, because those are two separate things. And obviously we had a couple of chats this morning about some exciting work that might be coming up toward the end of the year. But how was that lived experience, and how did the interview process go? How was it seen? How was it perceived? And also then how was it shaped, I guess, the role you're now doing for the business?
Yeah, so I think let's talk about from a sector perspective first. So as many of you will know, there has been recently a spotlight report from the Housing Ombudsman regarding, making sure that people are treated fairly with equal rights. And, that's taken a huge focus since the start of the new financial year in terms of what the Housing Ombudsman Service and, of course, the regulator for social housing are both looking for in terms of what we know about our tenants. We know, of course, that off the back of some really bad tragedies, and of course, we've recently had the second report on the Grenfell tragedy not too long ago, and of course, the tragic situation with the Wabi Shack as well, with damp and mold, where it wasn't picked up soon enough, really, that there's a child with a significant disability that'd be impacted by the state of the property. That's what's led to the regulator and, of course, the Housing Ombudsman looking to change things for the better and making sure we understand who our customers are and who our tenants are in our properties. Now, what I will say is that Great Places were very much ahead of the curve on this in terms of making sure that they had a team dedicated to finding out this information about our customers and be able to affect the customer profile to then do the changes that we needed to do. Now, I want to give a big shout out to Lizzie Marsden, who was the pioneer and the front runner at Great Places to making this happen. She's no longer with the business, but she's the reason that me and my team exist. And she's the one that got the sign off from the executive director group in terms of making it happen. So big shout out to Lizzie in terms of making that happen. In terms of the actual recruitment process for the role itself that I applied for as the Inclusive Services team leader, I think it's important just to give a little bit of prior context. So I'd been unemployed for about 2 or 3 months prior to going for the interview, having worked at a disability tech company who I was marketing manager for a short time. And then when this opportunity came up, it almost felt like it was written in the stars, to be quite honest. Having that lived experience of being in social housing, I was at a point in my career. I'm turning 33 in 2 days, and I'm at a point where I want to be giving something back. I want to have that social purpose, and housing was absolutely the right place for me to do, to do that. So when this opportunity came up, it was a real, exciting thing for me to get involved in. The interview process required me to build a presentation to say what I would do with the Inclusive Services team within my first 3, 6, and 12 months. Understanding, obviously, all of the background in terms of what was happening in the sector, what was leading to the need for us to have this information on our customers, and what would happen off the back of it. So I had to present that presentation for 10 minutes at the start of my interview. Then there was about an hour's worth of competency-based questions, as you get in most interview situations. And then there was a written exercise where I had to do a bit of data analysis to understand what information did we have, as in terms of what was available within the sector at the moment, what we collected, and what needed to be improved. And one key thing that I found within that is actually we'd only be collecting information, albeit very, very small amounts of information on the lead tenants. So it was either the tenant, the primary tenant, or the joint tenants. We hadn't done it on an entire household or occupant list up until that point. So that's ultimately what was needed, and thankfully I was very successful in my job. I found out within 24 hours of going for the interview that I'd got the job, and then my line manager, who is the head of customer contact at Great Places, Justine Carroll, also asked me if I would be interested in coming in the following day to do the recruitment process for my team, because that was already underway and he wanted me to be involved in that recruitment process. So I was lucky enough to be able to actually hire the people who I felt would be the right people for my team, who would be the right fit, who would fit my management style, my leadership style. And it's been an overwhelming success. We've been operational as a team for just over 6 months now. We've done questionnaires with about 2,000 customers, and I'll go into a bit more information about what that means later on. But the customers that we've spoken to have been highly receptive and understand the work that we're doing. And actually, we've been able to tailor some of the services for customers already. We've got some really good customer stories as well, which is amazing. And actually, I'm presenting to our board next week on some of that stuff. So very exciting, very exciting time to be in the sector. And I've been, pardon the pun, around the houses, so to speak. You've already mentioned and alluded to the fact that I was at Housing 24, Matt, which is my first conference that I'd been to in housing. Then, of course, we were both invited down to the House of Lords, which was amazing. It was a great experience. I've since then, of course, been to the Housing Community Summit in Liverpool. I believe that there's a chance of me going to the Housing Diversity Network Summit in October. And, I'm basically everywhere at the moment. It's quite nice. And I'm hoping that I'm being well received. It certainly seems that way from the feedback that I've had so far.
And I completely agree, it has. And I think, it's no surprise that I'm hoping kind of more speaking opportunities for yourself come up as well, as you share your insight and as you share your thoughts, because I think, and you and I talked about this before, and I've made sure to phrase this in a way that in no way causes offence, but I think, you and I wanted to have a very open and frank discussion about it. I think one of the things that stood out to me when we were maybe at the Housing 24 conference was that you put up your hand to raise a question, and everyone immediately assumed that you're a tenant because you're in a wheelchair. Because we don't get much in the way of, often, I don't think we get many people who are, with your kind of lived experience, always given the opportunity to attend conferences, or they're not always made accessible enough. I know there have been some issues with some of the conferences I've been at before where people have found they're not actually accessible enough for anybody who isn't able-bodied in that way. But also, I think when then you came out with your question kind of going, well, what about this, and how was that perceived? People were unjust, and it shocked me at the time. It's why I wanted to get you onto the roundtable in the first place. Almost shocked that you could so eloquently present a question and case based on lived experience and everything else, as if people almost were like, well, they're in a wheelchair, they're probably not going to be. How are you dealing with those kind of stigmas? Because I talked to a gentleman who broke his leg. He went around on wheelchair one day and on crutches another day. And the difference in how he was perceived on those 2 days was wild in itself. So how are you finding a sector which is all about supporting people who are apparently most in need and everything else, and the stigmas it has within the sector itself?
It's a very interesting question. And you are right in the sense that, rightly or wrongly, people make these assumptions and have this unconscious bias, which I think we all have to challenge. That somebody within who is in a wheelchair and who is visibly disabled, because we know people have invisible disabilities that don't necessarily get picked up on up until later in life, and therefore they may already have a career within housing. But people like me, with a visible disability in a wheelchair, we are perceived in a certain way, and just because I am physically disabled doesn't mean that I am, I have a learning disability or anything like that, and even people with those learning disabilities still have a place within housing with that lived experience. So, if they're available to attend customer panels or get involved, directly with the board or be part of, panels at events, they absolutely should be, because they're the ones that have that lived experience. But in terms of that perception that you're talking about, it is a challenge, and, facing that stigma is something I've had to do pretty much all my life. I've been disabled since the age of 7, in and out of my wheelchair in all of that time. And, some of it, first of all, the world isn't accessible. So unfortunately, I have to deal with society not necessarily being the most accommodating and accessible place anyway. But you have to be strong enough to have a voice. And that's something that actually I've only found myself within maybe the last 12 to 24 months, is to be able to speak up and advocate for myself where I feel that I need it, so that other people like me then feel empowered to do the same. So when I am perceived in a certain way within the sector, and not all of that is immediately apparent to me. Some of that is, like you've said, you're the one picking up on it, because I'm the one that's kind of focused on asking the question. I'm not really taking account of what's happening in my surroundings. I'm just focused on doing what I need to do as part of my job role to deliver what I need to deliver, and do it in the best possible way. I don't always get picked up. I don't pick up everything that actually happens, but I am very much aware of it all the time. Now, some of that is bias in good ways, and some of it is bias in bad ways. The amount of people that will more than happily give me a smile or be very welcoming when they see me in public, or hold a door open for me. That happens all the time. That's really welcome. But then you obviously get the other side of it, like you say, where people look at me and perceive me in a certain way where I'm not able to deliver eloquently and get my point across. And that's something that I've had to deal with for a long time. I don't really think about it as much anymore, but of course I am conscious of the fact that being in the space that I'm in, and now being in the role that I am in, effectively I am almost a face for other disabled people. And I fully accept the responsibility that comes with that. We all know the great saying from the Spider-Man film, with great power comes great responsibility. And I certainly feel that, I feel that level of responsibility, because I feel it's really important to be able to advocate and provide allyship for more people like me.
I couldn't agree more. And it's really hard sometimes, because when you need to be that person, when you're going, right, well, I've taken on that responsibility, you have, like you say, I'm happy to do it. But at some point, it's also can get exhausting. So I think it's finding that balance between the two is a real challenge. We've had some questions that have come through. But firstly, a few people said happy birthday. So that's all.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that.
Great. Just skip past. So Barbara said, good morning, James. Great intro. Why only 2,000 surveys when your housing association has over 20,000 homes? And I think this was something you were alluding to before.
Yeah, first of all, great question, Barbara. The fact of the matter is we hadn't done the work prior to my team going live in March of this year. So it's effectively from the start of the financial year really is kind of where we've taken off. And we've had to start from somewhere. I only have a team of 4 people. Now, 2 of those are part-time administrators and the other 2 are full-time specialists. So between a team of 5 of us, there's only so much that we can do in a set period of time. However, the targets that have been set internally, we are meeting, and we're very pleased with that. And we also set expectations that we wouldn't necessarily be analysing the data of customers until we'd gotten about this point through, so kind of 6 months in, for us to be able to understand what we're finding and what does that mean, and the so what that comes with collecting this information. Because that's the really key piece, is we don't want to just collect this information for no reason. We absolutely have to do it for the right reasons. And of course, in line with GDPR, legally, we have to have a reason for collecting information, particularly if it's to do with, protected characteristics and things like that as well. So that's kind of the stage that we're at. And that's the reason that we've only done 2,000 so far, is because, we've only just started, but we do envisage that, over the course of the next, 3-4 years, we'll get all of that information. And then, of course, over time, we'll start to incrementally be able to do more and more things with that information.
I'm going to bring you in. Like Claire, if anybody would like to come in and raise a question they're raised in the chat, then please feel free to. But I will get to questions in the chat as well. But Claire, do join us.
Hi, morning. James, it's absolutely brilliant to meet you. I've just found you on LinkedIn yesterday. It's brilliant to have you here. I didn't know you were speaking today. I just wanted to join in, and it was a delight to see you. Absolutely love to hear you talking about you've got to have a reason, the so what, the purpose. For those who don't know me, I am, as Helen called me the other day, the data lady. And I will be very interested in data. But what I'm wondering is, when you talk about this information about your tenants, what exactly are you collecting on these surveys?
Okay, thanks, Claire. First of all, great to meet you too. Thank you very much for asking the question. We're collecting quite a lot. Basically, anything that you can link to EDI, we're collecting. So that can be things like sexual orientation, disability, religion, ethnic minority background, gender, if of course that gender was the same that was assigned at birth, all of that great stuff in terms of EDI we're collecting. And then the other pieces that, in terms of, what we actually need to know in terms of tailoring our service is, do you have any issues in terms of how you access and communicate with us as an organisation? Yes and no. And if so, what? Yeah. And likewise, do you have any disabilities or ill health conditions that we need to know about? And we categorise those into 4 different things. So we talk about neurological, mental health, physical health, and respiratory. So those are the key things that we speak about within the disability area in terms of, where there might be a need to tailor some of our services. However, within the communication element and the accessibility piece, we also think about, hard of hearing, deaf, hearing impairments, visual impairments with blindness, etc. Anything to do with neurodiversity or autism spectrum, all that kind of stuff as well. So we do really get a lot of key information to quite a granular level to understand what our customers facing, not just the people that are on the tenancy, but their families facing, and then how do we then adjust our services accordingly. Likewise, if somebody's got care and responsibilities, that's really key for us to know, whether that's at home or elsewhere, because that could mean that we have to tailor our services in terms of how we engage our operatives to go and do a repair, because customers might not necessarily be available at certain points of the day. So it's even things like that we think about. There's an awful lot of stuff there, and I'll go into more detail about how we tailor our services throughout the rest of this conversation. But let's give you a little bit of an insight as to what it is that we're collecting.
Thank you for that. That's the second part of that. I really am on board with the is there something that's a barrier to you accessing the services?
And I am really concerned about the other EDI stuff. If you haven't got a really robust plan in place to how to use that, and that's something I'd love to talk more about, but I won't take over the whole of this. I can talk about it all day.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm more than happy for us to have a conversation about that, because there are reasons why we're collecting that information. Things like the Rainbow Roots Initiative, for example, with the LGBTQ community, and the fact we're going to have specialist kind of housing scheme set up for that. If it's to do with ethnic minority backgrounds, we're learning that certain people from specific backgrounds have communication barriers when it comes to language, or literacy barriers. That we can make those those connections, and then put some sort of service in place, maybe within our community investment team, for English as a foreign language to be picked up, and then give them the skills to be able to pick that up. So there are reasons why we're collecting that. It's just to understand more about our customers and how we can actually help them more.
Cool. Thank you.
Cheers. Yes, Jim, I'll bring you in.
Hello, good morning, James. Morning, everybody. Hope you're all well. My question is this. Our housing association has been very, very much at the forefront in terms of EDI, done everything they possibly can to include everybody, making all the efforts. I'll give you an example. I suggested that many of them should come on this today because you were speaking. And although our housing association engagement managers have tried to get them all involved, there seems this thing of not kind of then moving any further with that. So no matter how hard they try and get people of ethnicity or BAME or anything else involved, there's that thing, there's only so far they can go. You can lead a horse to water, and pencil must be led. Well, you know what I mean. So my point is, how are you managing to get people involved? And I know you've mentioned the other protected characteristics, but more so in terms of things like ex-service military personnel and people like that who may be housed in, what you could do for their mental health, post-traumatic stress and things like that, please, James.
Well, first of all, Jim, thank you very much for the question. Thank you. I had the pleasure of hearing you speak in Liverpool as well, at one of the panels. So it's nice to actually see you there, and I think your housemate was there as well at some point. So I had the chance to see you both there. Don't get me wrong; it is a challenge to engage the right people. When we're speaking to customers in particular, it's all about educating them in terms of what it is that we're trying to do, and help them understand that we're doing this for the right reasons. We do also appreciate that not every housing association has been the best at either collecting this information or engaging with customers of different backgrounds up until now. I mean, again, case in point, Grenfell is a really good example of that. Awabishak is a really good example of that. And we all know as a sector we need to do better. When it comes to getting those on the inside, from the housing associations engaged, I think again it's imperative that they understand what it is that's being asked of them by the regulator, and of course by the housing ombudsman, and then acting upon that as quickly as they can, but doing that in the right way. There's no point rushing it, collecting a load of information, doing nothing with it, and then that information becoming outdated. You need to be able to be in the position to do something with it straight away. So it may well be that housing associations, and yours may well be one of these, Jim, are almost gearing themselves up for that in terms of how they do it. I think the key thing really to understand is, how do they go about identifying vulnerability in its various shapes and forms, because that can be a temporary thing. I think, Matt, you mentioned somebody who you saw at the conference who've broken their leg, that can be a temporary thing, because once their leg is fixed, they're not going to need the wheelchair, they're not going to need the crutches anymore. But then you're also going to have people who have a more permanent disability, even if it is linked to mental health, Jim, like you say, with PTSD and that kind of thing, and making sure that those services are accessible. Now, of course, we are a housing association, and we have to understand that there's only so much that we can do, particularly in the inclusive services team, but also having that really strong relationship with, you know, the local authorities, with the adult social care teams, etc., to be able to then link people who are in need of those services to the right people. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that the inclusive services team or any other housing association would necessarily be responsible for putting that referral in, but even just with effective signposting to say, have you explored this route? Have you spoken to your counsellor? Have you done this? Have you engaged with your GP about this conversation? Knowing the types of conversations to have with those people, you know, regardless of what their background is, whether it's ex-military, whether it's, you know, a long-term disability such as my own, knowing the right places to go is going to be what's important over time. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, James. And there's a question in the chat. Can you give, and these kind of two tying together, so can you give examples of what kind of data you collect for your residents and household members? And how do you use that information, please? And it ties in with the next question, which came from Kelly. That previous one was from Jay. I'm interested in a bit more about the work and remit of your team. Is this around updating data and then shaping services? Or does the team work with customers who require adjustments? And how does the team work with other operational teams, such as housing management? It seems to be that piece that people are focused on. You know, Helen has said, would you be interested to understand the types of outreach your team has adopted to obtain tenant needs? This seems to be that people are really grasping hold of. How are we changing services, and what impact is it actually having day to day?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say it's great that there's this level of engagement, first and foremost, in terms of people wanting to understand this better to then implement that change. Just going to Helen's point about, you know, understanding the types of outreach that my team has adopted to obtain tenant needs. I think, you know, it's also important to understand what has worked before in the organisation. As I say, I'm new to housing, I'm new to team, I'm new to, you know, the organisation. This isn't the first time that we've had tenant engagement. So it's understanding what also has worked in the past. You know, has it been, you know, scrutiny groups? Has it been a customer committee? Has it been engaging with them in certain focus groups and utilising some of that as well? But also utilising all of the different elements of communication that we have, whether that's digital, non-digital, whether, you know, that's going to be in written form, you know, via a letter. Utilising every single option that's available to you to be able to engage with tenants is really important. Because we don't, first of all, we don't want to exclude anybody from the conversation. And second of all, it's important that we get that diverse thought in terms of feedback. So in terms of, you know, the outreach that the team have done, we've kind of adopted it on multiple fronts, and Helen, I'm more than happy to have a chat with you about that offline if you want me to. But of course, you know, feel free to come and ask a question again if you need to. To Jay's point around, you know, giving examples of what kind of data we're collecting for residents and household members. And it's very similar to what I mentioned before when Claire asked the question. So it's that key EDI information. We only collect the EDI information for tenants over the age of 18. So anybody under 18, of course, we wouldn't do that. But of course, then it's understanding who's in the household, have we still got the right amount, you know, the right people listed? If of course not, then making sure we update that information and make sure that everything's accurate and up to date. Now, what I will say as well with that is that the inclusive services team have a process in terms of how we do that. So if we identify somebody who has a disability or an ill health condition of any kind, then we will call them back within 6 months. First of all, to make sure that everything that we've done in terms of tailoring the service with them is still relevant and up to date. And second of all, to make sure that nothing has changed in the meantime that they needed additional support with, or even that they need less support with because maybe it was a temporary vulnerability or temporary disability that they had. If a customer has a accessibility or communication support need, then we will contact them again within 12 months, because particularly if it's to do with language and English not being their first language, traditionally it can take up to around 12 months for somebody to fully adopt that. And so we give them that room to, you know, to actually go away and see what the tailoring of services is like for us, you know, for them over the course of 12 months. And then if somebody doesn't necessarily have any support needs within the household, we'll still contact them again, but within 2 years. So we're still constantly keeping that data updated because it's so important that that's the case. And of course, as we get new tenancies involved and we get new customers coming into the business, then of course, we'll contact them accordingly. Now, because we have those processes in place doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way that they will be able to engage with us. The inclusive services team have our own direct line. They can speak to our customer hub and then be referred through to us. I think there was a question that you mentioned around how do we shape services alongside other areas of the business as well. So I'll be honest, that has been a little bit of a challenge in terms of making sure that, other areas of the business understand why this is a priority and why we need to change our ways of working. Because, within the tenancy management space, with our housing officers, or even in the planning space, when it comes to making sure that operatives go to the right jobs and understanding of what customers' needs are, there have been the need to change some of that way of working that's been there in the past to make it more customer centric. And there has been a little bit of pushback on that, but we have worked through that, and we've been able to make sure that operationally we are working to the best, the best needs of our customers, really. So it has been difficult, but I've made sure that I've got out there and I've spoken to heads of service within those different areas of the business to educate them on what it is that my team are doing, what we're collecting, how we're tailoring services, what that means for their staff in their area of the business, and what I would be looking for as the inclusive services team leader when it comes to delivering that service. Now, of course, I'm always happy to receive feedbacks. If, of course, the tailoring services that we put in place then goes to that area of the business, they're not able to maybe effectively make that happen, feed that back to me, because it's important that we keep that open line of communication available around what is within our remit and what isn't within our remit as a housing association to make things easier for our tenants. And then once we do that, of course, we can have that open line of communication back to the tenant as well to say, these are the things we can do, these are the things that we can't do. So what would you like to see from us going forward in terms of what we're able to do? Hopefully that answers the questions.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertical works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
Yeah, no, thank you very, very much. Colin had asked, how often is this data updated? And I think you've kind of given a highlight there in terms of what you're doing every 6 months. So there's a point raised by Claire Blacker. So I agree that great places are way ahead of the sector doing this, and really well done to them. I do notice with some concern that people with disabilities often end up in roles that are linked to their disability. Well, that's great if that's what they would like to do. Sometimes wonder if that's because they're overlooked for other roles. I totally agree about the value of lived experience of all types. And the sector often underestimates the value of the expertise people can offer. And I think it's interesting because I've had Walsall Housing Group come on here talking about their amazing lived experience team and what they're doing in their space. But one of the things that I know they've done, and this is through speaking and doing a lot of work with Connie Jennings, actually their contact centre is predominantly now staffed by people who have lived experience, because they've realised the power of that inclusive support community champions team they had and are now adopting it to other areas of the business. With your insight and with those, your other, because we're always speaking to other colleagues in the housing space. I appreciate, for you, it's less than a year in the industry so far. But how do you think the sector is? Do you think Claire has a point there? Do you think that actually a lot of time we're still a sector which values lived experience by just creating a lived experience team rather than going, well, actually, we need it at all facets of the business?
Yes and no, funnily enough. So Claire, a really, really great point, and I do see where you're coming from with this. I think it's imperative that we all, as a sector, go through more inclusive thinking training so that we can, think about how we can bring inclusivity into the sector without necessarily having to have these lived experience teams. Absolutely. But the inclusive services team, the way I've recruited it, I've not hired people based on their lived experience. I've got lived experience, and that's great. And I think, I'll be honest, I think that the reason I ended up getting the job is in part due to the fact that I have that lived experience, but I don't think that was solely it. I do believe that I've got the right skill set to actually be able to deliver this, whether I had a physical disability or not. It just so happens that I come with that bonus of having the lived experience, which ultimately, you know, is absolutely priceless if you can get it into a business. So I do see the value in creating a lived experience team to some degree. But arguably, and I think this is the point that Claire may well be trying to make, and Claire, you know, feel free to come in and correct me if you think I'm wrong on this. I can see you got your hand up already. That shouldn't be the only way into the organisation or into the sector for people with, you know, with that experience. There should be opportunities for them regardless. So there is almost that. It is biased. It's almost positively, in a way, discriminating against somebody, because you're bringing them in for something that nobody else can give, which is a real good thing. But actually, at the same time, that shouldn't be the sole reason you're bringing them into the business. So it almost flips why I think I've been recruiting. Right?
From the recruitment side, there's a huge advocacy for positive discrimination in the space, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But Claire, I'm going to bring you in to highlight your thoughts based on what James has shared there.
Well, that was absolutely what I was trying to get across, but I put my hand up in a panic because I didn't want you to think, James, that I thought you got that job because you're I absolutely did not think that. I think the problem is that you have the skills, and other people in wheelchairs and with other disabilities have the skills, and it's almost like it's kind of like, oh well, he's in a wheelchair as well, so we'll give him an extra tick. But yeah, I'm not saying Great Places specifically did this, but would you have got that extra tick if the job wasn't about disability? And I worry that people get overlooked because to a different type of job. You know, that's the kind of thing. And it's fine if everybody wants to work in an area that's related to the disability, then good for them and carry on. But for those that don't, I just think that we're not doing enough to make sure that their disability doesn't come into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Not very articulate.
No, it makes a lot of sense. You're absolutely spot on. So I think there's two elements to this. One that I'm going to pick up, just to make it very clear that the inclusive services team isn't just about disability. It's about understanding tenants from every single background. So that's to do, you know, with all of those protected characteristics that I've spoken about, and understanding those, you know, so that you are culturally intelligent, not just specific to one protected characteristic. I think the second point that you've made there, and actually I think Matt's the best person to answer this, you know, being in recruitment, because he will know this, and I know this, you know, myself, having, you know, worked closely with HR professionals and things in the past. There is a tick box exercise, so to speak, you know, not just within this sector but globally, that if somebody meets a protected characteristic, that they almost do get a little bit more preferential treatment when it comes to the hiring process. Is that fair to say, Matt?
Can be and can't be. I know some businesses do have disability awareness. They do have the Rooney Rule, for example. There are places which will guarantee kind of an interview for people from protected characteristics. A lot of businesses only do it, though, if they genuinely feel that either the team or department or business they're working in doesn't represent the community they're within. So that's why it's absolutely required, because otherwise what's happening
is in that box then, though, aren't you? It's the same thing. We're only you if it fits. So it's still the same thing, that the point that I'm trying to make, that we're only getting people if we need them. So if we need their experience, or we need them to even out the team, it's not just come and do this job because you're the best person for the job.
This was more of a HR directive, which said that no matter what whatever position it is within the business, if you're from a minority ethnic background or you have a disability, you will be guaranteed an interview as long as you meet the criteria of the job. So you still have to meet the essential criteria. because what they were finding was a lot of unconscious bias. And so a lot of unconscious bias was coming to play when kind of saying, okay, well, when you got an application form through and it was, I don't know, it might have, yes, I've got a disability, or it might be a name that people immediately look at and go, oh, well, I don't know how to pronounce that. They probably can't speak English. I've heard that said, unfortunately, it drives me crazy. And so what happened is that this was a way to proactively work against that. And then it's just scores based on an interview as standard. But what it was doing was at least opening the door to people having the conversation. And I think the area that the sector has fallen short on, and I can completely understand what you're saying, completely understand. But we also have to be very, very aware that unfortunately, a lot of the people who run social housing businesses, that are directors of social housing businesses, aren't always representative of the communities they're supporting. So something needs to be done to change it. And if proactive discrimination is a way to go about trying to troubleshoot that, and actually having a chance during an interview to go, right, well, tell us about your lived experience. What are we missing? What are we getting wrong? Where are we maybe missing a trick? It's only by getting to those interview stages that people are realizing the things that they don't know, because they've never had experiences in those situations. And I think that's maybe been one of the most eye-opening parts that I've spoken on the roundtable before about. So my fiance's mixed race. I have learned more about her from Black culture growing up in Scotland and from what it's like in the workplace than I have ever done from a podcast or anything else, because I've had the chance to sit and speak and understand and learn. And I think that's hopefully what the idea behind some of these initiatives is when you get to an interview stage going, well, actually, that would be incredibly useful to have, because we don't understand the value of it when we don't know it. And I think that's the interesting balance between the two at the moment. But also why it's so important we get people like James onto sessions like this, but panels, but also everybody, is why we've been so accidentally kind of very, very diverse in the speakers we have on the roundtable, because too often voices are dominated by people who look a little bit like me. And that's not always most useful for the sector. An able-bodied white person, particularly white male, you're kind of going, well, actually my lived experience, although there is a fair bit, it's very different to someone from another background. That's why our boards also need to be as diverse as they can be. Sorry, got on a soapbox there. I'm going to bring in Joe, and then I'll go to James. There's a few points I want to bring in the chat, because Jan has asked something about person-centered fire risk assessments. Also, I really want to bring in. But Joe, I'm going to bring you in first.
Hi, thanks, Matt. I just wanted to give from my own experience that the 2-tick scheme, the disability one, the housing associations are really getting around that by the requirement of you need to be in the office at least 40%. So then that doesn't cater for people who have fatigue or very profound mobility issues that they are not able to get into the office. So that kind of doesn't help with the representation of our residents who also have those kind of conditions, including like people with neurodiversity, and how they get letters, for instance, because a lot of people with neurodiversity don't like black font on white paper.
And how have you found that with your team, James, when you're trying to recruit for, having a look at stuff like, those flexible working policies, or as you say, neurodiversity and everything else? Because when you're trying to actively engage with people, you've got to be as broad as you can be.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I mean, in terms of recruitment, I am very pleased with the team that I've put together. We've got a real good range of different types of people within my team. So whilst there's only 4 people on my team other than myself, I've got a physical disability that clearly is quite visible. I've got a member of the team who, obviously I won't name, but who won't mind me saying that they've got some mental health conditions. I've got a range of ages on the team, so there's no age bias there. There's an LGBTQ plus member of the community in my team, and there's a very good balance of male and female as well. So we've got a real good mix of different types of experiences and backgrounds and that kind of stuff. But actually, when it comes to understanding what's needed for customers, we just ask them. What do you need? Do you find it, is it easy for you to contact and communicate with great places? Yes and no. Okay, well, if not, what are your barriers? Is it to do with the fact that
I think on Joe's point, have you found that with staffing though? Have you found that actually, Jim, I will come back to you, I promise. Have you found that when it comes to that staffing piece, and when it comes to the hiring process, and when it comes to as you being inclusive for yourself, as obviously having your own disabilities, have you found sometimes that some jobs are asking stuff that just isn't feasible because of your disabilities, and has housing, in your experience, shown enough flexibility there to go, yeah, okay, but we can make that work because we want your expertise, or have you still found barriers there?
I'll be honest, housing has probably been the most accessible when it comes to the recruitment process, particularly from my own experience, having gone through the hiring process. There have been other areas, where you'll let people know ahead of time, for example, you've got a disability, and then you end up at a non-accessible office. That kind of stuff happens all the time. But also, I do think it's important that all organisations, not just housing, think about what does that mean and ask the right questions. Because somebody, as Joe rightly mentioned, somebody with a neurodiversity, for whatever reason, might benefit, for example, of having interview questions prior to the interview, so make sure they can process that in the right amount of time so that they can answer the questions accordingly in the process. Now, that doesn't always necessarily happen, and it can be very role specific, that. And again, Matt, I think from your own experience in recruiting, you'll understand that better than I will.
I'm a massive advocate for questions for all roles being released beforehand. I see no benefit, because we're not trying to learn how people think on their feet. We're trying to learn how well people do the job, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So I would argue that there are still lots and lots of challenges there, Joe, that we do need to overcome. Even things such as somebody with dyslexia needing something on a different coloured piece of paper to be able to read it and process that effectively. Stuff like that. I would argue that housing has been the best. And again, shout out to Lizzie Marsden, who made sure that when I gave my interview, she said, do you need any specific requirements for the interview process? And that gave me the opportunity then to be able to advocate for myself and say, yes, I need these things.
I think what's interesting there is maybe great places need to do some work with the wider sector, because actually there's a lot of places.
Yeah,
that's really, really interesting. But it's brilliant that your own experience has been that, because showing, well, actually you can make it feasible. You've just got to work at it and actually speak to people like yourself and go, how do we do it? Jim, I'm going to bring you in because I know you've had your hand up a couple of times, so do come in.
Right, Matt, there's a couple of things that I can actually answer on from my own, again, lived experience. For one, when I was on the Taurus EDI panel, I brought in the Reach Deck system for people with neurodiverse needs, dyslexia. I was on the Landlord Operations Committee still, so I was able to push it through at board, and we took that up. So that's when people have English as a secondary language, they can understand it. If they have dyslexia, the screen will change to the colour they need for the best way of reading. The assistance of Easy Read, of any number of combinations for that to address that problem. So in an interview stage, if you're working there, you could actually have that facility on your screen when you're working, so you can still, take part. Regarding what you were saying, Matt, about colour, our church would be lost at the moment. All our priests are from Uganda. So we have that side of the aspect of religious life and ethnicity coming through there. And obviously, growing up in the family I did, there were a lot of Jesuit missions coming over, from different countries, because my uncle was a Jesuit. So I had that experience, lived experience, as you call it, of living and learning about different cultures and different people. So in that one, I was fortunate. But as I say, as far as your tenants are concerned and getting them involved in staff, once again, it's only a matter, there's only so much you can do to highlight the issues and bring it to them and say, here's the opportunity for you to join in. If they're not willing to join in, then really you're stymied, aren't you? There's nothing further you can do with it, James.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jim. There is an element of there's only so much you can do with what's available to you. But first of all, it's great to hear that all those provisions that Taurus have done and how you've been able to feed into that have been taken forward, and that's really, really encouraging. The difficulty that I find and continue to find, regardless of whatever workplace I work in, is the disparity between what we do to bend over backwards for our customer base and actually what we do within our colleague base. So actually getting those two things to marry up is something that I'm really, really keen to make sure we do. And Matt, obviously, you mentioned very, very briefly a couple of minutes ago, is asking the right people the right questions. So making sure that you've got the right people in the room with the experience to then be able to give that advice, to then make those changes happen. But again, more to your point, there's only so much you can do before. I think the phrase you used before was the old adage of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So you've got to just do what you can, be safe in the knowledge that you've done your advocacy piece, and then there's only so, you know, other people that need to pick up their end of the bargain, so to speak.
Thank you, James. Steve, I'm going to bring you in. We've got some questions in the chat, and we're going into the last 10 minutes, so we're running out of time already. But Steve, I'm going to bring you in.
Yeah. Good morning. Morning, James. Like yourself, I'm a part-time wheelchair user. But I think there is a danger that housing associations are going to be going to take over the social services from the government, the way things are going. Yes, I agree. I have probably different needs to an able-bodied person, but there's only so much I think a housing association should be required to do. I completely don't get me wrong, they're all doing a fantastic job. But I see that as the government is cutting funding for social services around different services, the housing associations are taking it up, and it's not part of their core business. And it's taking funds away from their core businesses. So so all tenants at the end of the day will be losing out. And as I say, I'm disabled, so I'm not being biased here, but some other services may be losing out from the core business because the landlords are taking too much on. I agree about English as a second language and you know, things like that. But I think there's got to be a line where the landlords say, I'm sorry, that is not our responsibility.
You are absolutely right, Steve. Yeah.
You know, and it's not only that, but speaking from a disabled person's point of view, what do people perceive a disability to be? I mean, I've gone places, hotels, holiday camps, things like that, where supposedly they are disabled, you know, wheelchair friendly, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Get there, supposedly an accessible room, and there's a bath in there, not a wet room. How the hell is that an accessible room?
You know what, Steve? That is a really good point. And funnily enough, at the Housing Community Summit in Liverpool, the hotel that I stayed in was an accessible room. You know, everything was great. Went into the bathroom, even the sink was lowered. There was plenty of grab rails around. Everything was in place, and then there was a bath.
Didn't stay at the Dolby, did you? Because I did, and I had exactly the same thing.
No, I think it was a Travelodge or something I stayed. I can't remember exactly, but I'm not here to throw hotel chains under the bus. But you are right in what you're saying. I think obviously you've mentioned that similar to myself, you're an ambulatory wheelchair user. You've got that lived experience of disability, and you understand how difficult it can be to drive that accessibility. And you are right in what you're saying. We've been asked to do more with less, and we all know that, you know, funding is tight for most sectors, not least adult social care. And some of the panels and talks that I attended at the Housing Community Summit in Liverpool were of the belief, and I'm yet to see this happen, but are of the belief that actually almost flipped on what you were saying there, Steve, where it's almost housing is taking on the responsibility of social care, that social care is going to take on housing. And therefore drive what needs to happen within housing in terms of making sure there's that social care piece. Now, regardless of what happens, whether that happens in that form or in the way that you said it, it doesn't really matter, quite honestly. At the end of the day, there's human beings that are on the receiving end of support needs. And you are absolutely correct in that we need to be able to draw the line and say, this is what we can do and this is what we can't do. And again, similar to what I said to Jim before, there has to be cooperation from the other agency to then pick up that second piece. So when we draw the line and say this is where we stop, they then need to be able to pick up the, you know, where we leave off effectively and go, all right, we'll pick it up from here, and that is our responsibility. And that's the key piece around that agency working that I was talking about earlier on.
Yeah, I don't get me wrong, I completely agree.
I'm going to ask you to catch up with James afterwards. We've got 4 minutes.
All right.
Bunch of questions in the chat, but I think there's definitely a follow-up conversation we had there, and maybe a follow-up roundtable on exactly those kind of points. And I'd love to hear it. But Steve, I will come back to you because I want to get to everybody who's left a point. So
that's fine.
There's a point which came through from Jan, which said an obvious question from me. I mentioned it before. What about person-centered fire risk assessments? Is that having any impact in terms of the data you're collecting or the insight you're having, James? Absolutely,
and actually within our top priority group of customers that we first went out to and contacted when we started doing our questionnaires was those within our high-rise buildings for building safety reasons. So we've actually worked very, very closely with the building safety team over the last few months. 1, to collect the right information, understand where there are customers who have vulnerabilities. 2, to understand in the event of a fire or the lift in the building breaking down, would they have difficulty in getting out in the event of a fire? And if so, what were those difficulties? Now, once we'd actually collected that information, we passed that on to the building safety team, and they would then build a personal evacuation plan for that customer. And that's something that's ongoing, that's not going to stop, and we're just going to continue to do that. We've started in the high-rise buildings because from a regulatory perspective, there's going to be, fire safety stuff and building safety work that's going to be coming into the space within, I think it's October. And of course, again, with what we've learned from Grenfell, we have to do something with that sooner rather than later. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's just for high-rise buildings. We need to start there because they're the most at-risk customers, so to speak. But then we think about mid-rise, low-rise buildings, and then, of course, customers who live even just in regular social housing or flats. So it's not that we're just focusing in that one area.
I'm going to give you about 30 seconds, if possible, pal, because I know we could talk a whole session on this.
Well, that's pretty much it. That's kind of where we're at with it.
Jan, did you want to come in there for 30 seconds?
Yeah, only just to remind everybody that in fact most people die in low-rise properties, not high-rise.
Absolutely.
And the point that James made is really, really important because it's low-rise properties that are high risk. Only 3 people died in tower blocks last year compared to 177 in low-rise.
And when we're looking at things like when strategy and things like that, it's absolutely vital. So thank you so much for bringing that to the table today.
Choose a little note to finish on.
Sorry, Jim, there's some questions I'm going to go to in the...
yeah, fine. Just a comment.
Thank you. Jim mentioned that they've allocated funds to the amputees charities, of course includes loss of limbs, which was great to read. Question from Stuart Wilson. Why is EDI info not collected on under 18s? Surely any disabilities or access issues they have would affect how the business should deliver services, James?
Yeah, so EDI, when we're talking about EDI, we're talking about things that are things like sexual orientation, gender assigned at birth. Those things aren't going to necessarily be relevant for under 18s for quite a significant period of time. However, things like disability and accessibility requirements, then yes, absolutely, we would collect that and therefore we would tailor the service for them effectively.
Thank you. A question from David Guy. Thanks for sharing, James. Wishing you every success with GPHG. Out of interest, how closely are you working with colleagues working on complaints to ensure both lessons learned are captured, but genuine changes to service delivery can be made above and beyond reasonable adjustment, i.e. rather than making a change for an individual repair? Are you able to positively change norm, policy, processes and culture?
Yes, we are, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for the question. I've been working very, very closely with the complaints teams. Not least because we've seen at least double the amount of complaints coming over the last 12 months into the business because, of course, there's a bigger focus on giving customers more accessibility to complain. So it's very imperative that we work closely with the complaints team, and I have done that. And we've got some really good customer stories off the back of it as well, where we have changed the service. We've really even been able to install things like grab rails, etc., into customers' properties off the back of the conversations that I've had with them.
Fantastic. Helen had said it's good to hear you connect with other internal departments, as I'm guessing different departments may be able to flag problems that are a direct result of unknown and underlying issues. And I think that ties into what you're saying there, which is where, when we talked about lived experience in teams earlier, I think this is where the difference is. As long as we're willing to listen, there's a reason to have people with lived experience in the business. The most frustrating thing I hear is when we intentionally recruit lived experience and just ignore everything that's shared. But that's a whole nother discussion. Absolutely. Jim had said, we realise how important lived experience and protected characteristics are, but we must include all tenants, including able-bodied tenants. I don't quite understand, but we'll come back to that. Claire has said, like the unconscious bias seen at L&Q in the case where compensation was awarded this week, it's still definitely an issue. She agrees with Claire that in a wider sense, people with lived experience of discrimination or ableism are often expected to take on the responsibility of fighting for equality and equity, despite the fact it's already exhausting to suffer the discrimination and ableism. How often do organisations appoint EDI champions or similar and then have to do it on top of their day job? I'm sure that's a whole discussion. Yeah. I'm sure we'll definitely come back to, because James, I can see you smiling to that one. I'm sure you probably had those experiences in the private sector as well. And then a lot of people saying thank you. Yeah, I think that's the main things I can kind of see through there. So James, just as kind of any final thoughts you'd like to share with the group before we log off today? I mean, a huge thank you for coming on, but I guess what would your final message be to the sector before we wrap up today, and how can people follow up with you after this conversation?
Well, I'll start there. So if people do want to follow up with me afterwards, then you can contact me on my email address, which is james.feetham, F-E-E-T-H-A-M, as you can see under my lovely face here, at greatplaces.org.uk. So feel free to drop an email to me if you do have any questions. With regards to the last couple of things that I do want to just leave everybody with, first and foremost, please listen to your tenants and please listen to your colleagues as well. Work collaboratively to make sure that you are doing the absolute best thing for your customers. Everything that we do at this point as a sector needs to be person-centered. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to tailor each specific service to a customer, but offer services that customers are able to access that makes their experience much more equitable. It's the first thing I would say. Second of all, if you do have the opportunity to go through any sort of inclusive thinking training, then do so. The Housing Diversity Network are offering inclusive thinking masterclasses on specific areas, one of those being disability inclusion. So have a look at that. And the final thing is record keeping. Like, this is a huge thing that needs to be said. Whatever you know about your customers, whatever role you work in, make sure it's recorded somewhere centrally so that everybody in the organisation has the opportunity to work with that information and do the right thing for the customer. So record keeping absolutely has to be at the forefront of everything you do.
Thank you very, very much. We could have gone on for another hour with ease there, James, but a huge thank you. Enjoy the rest of your birthday. Thank you for doing this on your annual leave. I really appreciate it. But for now, thank you everyone who could attend, and I look forward to catching up with you at Roundtable soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.